Okay, looks like we are live now. So, good afternoon, everyone. I guess one thing to start off with is that I seem to be getting a bit of video flickering. Hopefully, that's not showing up on the stream. Um, anyway, so this week and next, or sorry, I guess last week and this week because it's the weekend now. Um, the local community radio station KRSN has been doing interviews with all the candidates. So they're definitely worth tuning into. I know I we shared my interview with them on our Facebook page. I'll go ahead and look up and put the other ones into the chat because um, they're all certainly worth listening to. You should certainly hear what all of our candidates have to say, though not everyone has been interviewed. I believe this week uh, Denise and David Rigor are going to be doing interviews. So tune into them as well. Here's that link. Geez, I'm certainly still seeing flickering. Are you, John?
No, you're good at hearing the videos okay as well.
Huh. Weird.
So at least on my end, you're showing up okay and the audio is good.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I suppose it goes without saying that I don't really think that we should be going back to full business operation just yet. I know that that was another thing that happened last week. It was a protest in the county to reopen businesses. Hey, Charlotte. So I know there's always this sort of I don't know tinge of hypocrisy to that Automotive Professionals is still open because we are essential. But I can certainly tell you that if we get the slightest hint of infection here, then we're shutting down. So yeah, I suppose while I know that these sort of early minutes are a bit awkward to try and get through while waiting for other people to join the stream and see if there's anything that they want to talk about. So John, what do you got?
Do you want to talk about the email that you got about the lights at the tennis court over on Urban Park?
Yeah, so that's fair. So somebody did reach out to discuss the tennis court lights at Urban Park, saying that they are quite bright and that they run until 10 o'clock. So at least one thing is that that's probably not a violation of state law, as looks to me that so we have a Night Sky Protection Act in New Mexico, but apparently by the state, nighttime starts at 11, which seems a bit weird. But I am trying to figure out, that county development code still does regulate light levels, particularly in residential areas. So I am currently looking into the question of how bright lights are allowed to be in residential areas, because certainly, if anybody should be held to county code, it's the county itself. And having super bright lights shining on people's houses until 10 o'clock, I don't know. I certainly respect the fact that people want to go to bed earlier than that. So that's sort of an interesting ongoing thing. I think it's been going on for quite a while. But I don't know. I guess I don't want to probably get into more specifics than that on like an ongoing matter, other than to say that light levels, light levels in the county shining on residences, that's a real issue. Um, I it's a bit tricky because, of course, I don't go to Urban Park at night, so I don't know what temperature lights are. That's what spectrum they emit. I assume they're not the cool orange that we typically see from our street lights, which are much more manageable. The sodium, uh, was it sodium filament? I guess is what they are. But street lights give a nice spectrum. I assume that this is not like that. So, I think that they turn back on in May. So I'll certainly make a nighttime trip out there, figure out exactly what's going on.
I guess just a general question. Any thoughts on how the county could assist when it's time to reopen again? Once things actually get settled and we feel like we've got everything under control?
Yeah, so it's what the county can do when it finally does come time to reopen. Um, so the concern that everybody has about reopening, on kind of any timeline, is reinfection. And God, the COVID-19 is like a brutal virus, right? So now, so I guess first off, so people talk about the 1918 flu pandemic, in which infections started declining, so people started going out again, and obviously the Great War ended, so there was a lot of celebrating about that led to even worse infection in the second round than the first. We seem to be in an even worse situation with COVID-19. So the big COVID-19 concern is that South Korea has been reporting cases of reinfection of people who had previously had it, indicating that it may not be the case that getting the disease and getting over it then makes you immune to it, right? So that, for example, is really bad news for Sweden, right? So Sweden has famously taken this stance of just sort of letting people get infected in order to create herd immunity, right? But if you don't get immunity, or if immunity is spotty from being infected, possibly due to mutations or just something strange about the virus, I don't think that's well understood at the moment. But if that's the case, then we probably have to go off the assumption that there isn't going to be a sort of good, well-defined time to reopen the county. So then ultimately getting back to the question, so what can the county do about reopening when it seems to be safe to do so? The main answer is we can't let down our guard even when it seems that the crisis has ended, right? So any crisis measures that are enacted are going to have to continue well past when things look to be reopening. So I know that the county manager had discussed various sort of emergency response things that the county was looking at. Probably one of the more important ones, in my opinion, is setting up cots and ideally partitions within something like the high school gym as an additional place for people who are infected and need treatment to go. So that plan is going to have to continue, I think, and ultimately the high school is just going to have to deal with it. The high school is going to have to deal with having a gym that's assuming that the high school reopens on a similar kind of timeline. The high school is going to have to just deal with not having access to its gym for the foreseeable future. And then, similarly, the volunteer efforts that are spinning up, such as Altogether Los Alamos is the main one. That's going to have to, I think, stay active well past any transitional reopening of businesses and any transitional lifting of restrictions. So yeah, there's no miracle workers in the county government. So the only thing that any of us can really do is continue to be vigilant and continue to take these protective measures. That everybody should be wearing a mask. I said when someone asked a few weeks ago about why I'm wearing a mask, yeah, partly the reason is that I am here with my campaign manager, but it's also just a symbolic thing, right? Everybody should be wearing masks when they're out of their house, and I'm out of my house now, so it's ultimately just the proper thing to be doing, and continuing with good sanitization activities, routine hand washing, paying attention to what you touch and what you've touched since then. Uh, I think probably one of the advantages that we'll have once we start getting to the point of soft reopenings of things is that we'll all be used to the kinds of activities that we should be doing during this time. The habitual mask wearing, habitual hand washing, the keeping physical distance between others. I think all these things will be pretty ingrained habits over the coming months, and so mainly we're just going to have to keep doing all of this stuff until there's a sort of dramatically higher confidence that we've beaten the virus. And as far as the county goes, the county is going to have to take the same attitude with regard to its crisis response measures.
David did make a comment there.
Oh, naturally. If more people are tested, we'll know where hotspots are and the direction it's traveling. Maybe county can sponsor tests. Yeah, and I know the county did organize a mass testing at Overlook Park in White Rock, which was good. And as I said before, the problem with the White Rock testing was that I assume the reason was test kits were limited, but I think, and I suspect that you agree, David, as that we really need to get access to enough testing kits to have just blanket testing. Anybody who wants can get tested, rather than those who are showing symptoms or those who live with someone showing symptoms, which was basically the criteria for the previous test. I saw that you had posted about what was it, in Pewaukee? They did a blanket testing program. It is a little strange to me that Pewaukee was able to pull that off and we aren't. So I think that's definitely a question worth looking into as well, is ultimately, why did we have such a limited test in White Rock, and can we get more expansive testing in the county? But yeah, I mean, absolutely right. I think that's one of the other keys to countries that have been managing the crisis better than us, is that they have focused on heavy testing and testing of everybody, and then tracking down the contacts of people who've tested positive. So yeah, testing is definitely a key to this. So yeah, I'll try and learn what I can about why testing in the county has been as limited as it has been. So the Department of Health has created a dashboard. I'm going to bring it up here. New Mexico Department of Health dashboard. So go and link that in the chat as well. So yeah, as usual, if you look at that for us, it says that we have 6 reported positive tests and 278 tests done. And that number has not changed lately. So yeah, as far as Los Alamos County goes, we're definitely in the tricky situation where we're still not reporting a large number of positive cases, but there also hasn't been very extensive testing here. So as a result, the extent of the infection just isn't known at the moment. And so then I guess it comes as a little surprise that Santa Fe County is colored yellow, indicating that they have a greater number of cases, or I guess it's orange. But they have 3,000 tests done. Though, yeah, that dashboard is also certainly worth keeping tabs on.
Do you want to just do a little pitch on May 4th? You got the League of Women Voters thing.
Oh, yeah. So there are some upcoming dates. One of them is May 4th at 6:30. So that's a week from tomorrow. The League of Women Voters is doing a Zoom-based candidate forum. So I think like anybody who is in a primary election, which again, the primary is June 2nd. So anybody who is in a primary election is going to be speaking at this forum and answering questions. So not just Rodney, Denise, Greg, and me, the 4 Democratic candidates for county council, and we'll be there, but also the Democratic candidates for U.S. House are going to be there. So I think it'll be really interesting. I can definitely say that there's a lot of, I guess, cool candidates running for U.S. House. So the story there, by the way, is that one of our senators, I think it's Tom Udall, is retiring. So our U.S. Representative Ben Ray Lujan is running for U.S. Senate to replace him, which means that our U.S. House Representative seat is up for election this year. So there's 8 or 9 candidates, vying to run as the Democratic candidate for the U.S. House. They're definitely worth listening to. And then, yeah, there are 2 other important dates. So the first one, which John posted into the chat, is May 5th. So New Mexico is a closed primary state, which means that if you want to be able to vote in the primary, you have to be registered with a political party that's holding a primary, which in practice is the 2 major ones. So if you are currently registered, declined to state or independent, in a closed primary state, there is no reason to be registered independent, because all that means is that you're not allowed to vote in primaries. It means nothing else than that. So if you want to vote in the upcoming primary election, register for a party. So yeah, that deadline is May 5th, a week from Tuesday. And you can change your voter registration at nmvote.org, which just redirects to the Secretary of State's voting website. It's a quick process. You just put in like your driver's license number and social security number, and then you can just change it from there. And it happens instantly. I know you can change your voter registration through the county clerk's office, but of course, the county government has also gone into at least a semi-lockdown state itself. So, the clerk's office is closed to visitors. I think maybe you can get in there if you call them and tell them ahead of time that you're coming. But honestly, I haven't tried. I've been conducting all my county business by phone and email. So while you can theoretically change your voter registration in person with the clerks, I'm actually not sure what that means in practice. So then the other deadline is May 28th. So this is the deadline to apply for an absentee ballot. It's been in the news that I think the state wanted to go to an all mail-in ballot, assume everybody's an absentee voter this year, and just send ballots to everybody. That didn't end up happening. The state Supreme Court struck that down. So as a result, in principle, it's still an in-person vote. In practice, they're letting anybody apply for an absentee ballot. There's no reason. I've already applied for an absentee ballot myself. And all you have to do, again, is go to nmvote.org, and there's a link there to request an absentee ballot. It took me just a couple of minutes, similar thing. You just have to put in some personally identifying information and then confirm your registration, and they'll mail it. So yeah, again, going back to the country that's been handling this the best. I know South Korea has been doing some in-person voting, and they've just been doing it with the protocols you would expect. Mandatory hand washing on entering the ballot place, keeping space from everybody else, wearing a mask. And I certainly don't see anything wrong with doing those protocols, but at the same time, even if you want to do it, in-person voting this year is going to be slow. So, to avoid congestion at the polling places, which then becomes a great vector to spread the virus, just apply for an absentee ballot. It's pretty easy.
You still have signs, right?
Oh, yeah.
At the shop.
That's another really good point. So this election, of course, is strange because, we haven't done an election with a pandemic going on in over 100 years. So normally the way that one handles yard signs is by, you knock on doors, you talk to people, and people who are really interested in supporting you, you offer them a sign. And that's the main way that signs get distributed. Of course, nobody's going around knocking on doors this year. It would be insane to try. So I have ordered yard signs, and they have arrived. And the plan is, if you're interested in displaying a yard sign, and of course, I would love it if everybody did, the signs are here at Automotive Professionals at 99 DP Road. So you can just show up and get one. Here at the shop, of course, we do have plenty of disinfectant. So you can certainly observe whatever precautions you think are necessary, and we'll certainly help out with any of that on taking a sign. And I guess, even though I kind of hate stepping away from the live stream, I'm going to go into the shop office and grab one. So I'll be back in 30 seconds. So yeah, signs look like this. As with everything that's well designed about this campaign, I have to thank Jordan for putting that together for me. And I certainly have to also thank Aspen Copy, who did the printing for them. They came out really nice. The colors look good. So yeah.
Just
So
a
yes,
question for you, since you're
right.
writing it down.
Well, and that's and yeah, that is a sort of nice question for everyone. So I'll say my favorite county trail is so I live near Aspen Elementary School in North Community. So we have a trail which is called the Homestead Trail, and it connects to, I believe, Acid Canyon Trail. But so it goes into that canyon. I don't actually know the name of it, and like crosses a bridge and then goes to the trailhead at the aquatic center. So that's the trail that I take the most. Um, if the weather's nice and I need to get to the shop, but I have time, then it's really nice to get downtown via the trails. Of course, it has to be a bit of a lazy day to do that, since it takes me about an hour to walk from my house to downtown. But I'm also not a super avid outdoorsman. So even though I've certainly gone on other trails, that well, I don't know. I kind of prefer a trail to be relaxing, and so these sort of flatter trails through the canyons just around town are more for me. Um, like Mitchell Trail is more of a special occasion kind of trail. There's another trail that I like, which again I don't know the name of, but the trailhead is at the end of Los Pueblos on Bronca Mesa, and it just sort of goes out to the end of one of the mesas. It's pretty rocky and there's a bit of clambering involved, but it's a nice way of spending the afternoon heading out there. And now that the weather is finally getting warm, I may actually be able to get outside more. And of course, that was another thing that the county manager brought up, is that the county has decided not to close the trail system because it's a way of getting outside and avoiding, going stir crazy. That doesn't really involve at least close contact. So as long as people, continue to observe good distancing protocols on the trails, I think it's great that the trails are staying open, particularly now that the weather's warming up.
I asked you earlier before we started this, do you think the pandemic has affected the local residential real estate market much?
Yeah, so this is more of a realtor question, which
Well, I think it has
Yeah.
impact on just the county in general.
Right. So the question is, what's going on with the residential real estate market? And, hopefully David Horpedahl is still around if he has any insight. So I've been primarily devoted to Automotive Professionals concerns for the last month. So I actually have been really letting residential real estate slide. I did just check, and there are far more listings than there have been in a while now, 18. So it does look like houses are coming on the market. I suppose this shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. I think that if I were holding off on selling a home, I would probably personally be concerned about how the pandemic is going to affect the housing shortage. Um, there's always sort of the question when you're holding on to an asset like that, and if you're planning on selling, right? If it is sort of a an investment asset. Um, you have to worry about um, whether or not such a huge asset is going to come down from the peak that it's been at. Um, it's sort of always been one of my concerns with the aggressiveness of housing development is whether or not anything will happen to lab funding, and then the worst thing with aggressive development is then finding that by the time the units um, come online, come up for sale, that the market conditions in which you started developing haven't held out. So certainly, if I was a housing developer, I would be concerned. It wouldn't surprise me too much if people are now really looking more heavily at selling their houses if they have one for sale. So yeah, you know as I said in the first video that I made, um, so I said that a market this size should probably have more like 100 listings. That actually came from a housing study that the county did back in the 90s. But that study also pointed out that it's pretty much never been the case that we've had 100 houses on the market. So, I say that there's 18 listings today, and that's far more than I've seen recently, um, which might indicate at least that the seller's market is starting to dampen some. Um, but at the same time, of course, 18 listings is still not actually a huge number. But I don't know. I know that there are people in the county who are hoping to buy. So I definitely, um, I hope that there actually being listings on the market continues. I really do think that, particularly with the expansion of the lab population, people who want to stay here long term, I think have had a problem doing it, at least, and living here. Yeah, so as much as it's sort of never something that you're supposed to say as a realtor, I do kind of um, hope that we are starting to see a bit less of an extreme seller's market. An increase in listings may be a sign of that. Hopefully it is. Maybe it's just a blip. But, I'll make an effort to pay more attention to the residential market. Yeah, so Charlotte says, I've noticed Pueblos have had better access to testing. You think that's because of federal involvement, that the federal government's had more access to tests than state governments? And I know there have also been stories about, uh, states having to sort of fend for themselves in terms of getting access to, personal protective equipment and testing kits and all of that. So, yeah, I guess it wouldn't be too surprising if the federal government is simply a bigger actor and able to command more of the testing marketplace. And by the way, I guess I should say, I think it's ridiculous that we're discussing a pandemic in terms of competition among states and the market forces behind testing. Yeah.
Just an off-topic question. I posted it there in the chat box.
Yeah, comfort foods while staying at home. So, I suppose, it's always a bit of a confession to say it, but it does feel that part of the reality of same-sex marriage is that you never quite leave bachelorhood. So, I don't know. I've been making quesadillas recently, um, and I don't know. Jordan was making a big bunch of shredded chicken for burritos. So yeah, I guess for us it is kind of this Mexican food or new Mexican food. So I come from Arizona, originally from Phoenix. So to me, new Mexican food is still a bit weird. To me, for example, green chili stew. If you go to a Mexican restaurant in Phoenix, and get green chili. It is actually more of a stew, or a friend of mine described it as more of a gravy. And I do really like it. As much as New Mexico has better green chilies, as in the, what do they call it, a fruit? Uh, the actual like green chilies that we have access to are better than the ones in New Mexico or in Arizona. But I still, frankly, prefer Arizona style Mexican food. I'm sorry, but that means that I've been hewing more in that direction. Though that said, back when I worked at the lab, um, Fridays were always a bit exciting because the lab cafeteria, I suspect, because the lab cafeteria gets really lazy on Fridays, owing to 40 odd percent of the lab population being off. But the lab cafeteria, at least when I was working there, did self-serve Frito pies on Fridays, and that was always kind of an exciting break to the day because being self-serve means you could go pretty hog wild with it and just gorge yourself on Frito pie. But I don't know. Comfort food for me is probably more degenerate than you'd hope because I brought up quesadillas, but I've also been eating more pizza rolls than I should be.
Have you heard any local updates on the status of DP Road and the lead that's found there?
Oh, yeah, the status of DP Road. So, as I've said before, it's pretty hard to get updates on what's going on in the county at the moment because I can't just like walk into CDD, or community development, and start blabbing at people. Instead I have to like coordinate phone calls and all of that. So we got an email a week ago from Los Alamos Main Street, which went out to the DPO business owners. And what it said is that construction on the elderly housing project, which is called the Bluffs, or the county sometimes calls it A8B, is actually going forward. They said they're doing geotechnical investigation as to determining what kind of dirt is there so that they can do the structural engineering work. That they're going to be doing that pretty soon. And also this whole situation with the underground uranium and lead at on DP Road. So that was kicked off by construction contractor Parker Construction, was utilities trenching. So, and I think I've said it before, but the backstory is that DP Road is one of the few places in the county that does not have sewer. It's primarily on septic. But septic isn't going to work for an apartment complex, so the county has been really expediting getting sewer access, at least to the apartment complexes going in here. So it was sewer trenching that unearthed the uranium. So from what I've been able to piece together, it sounds like they have gone to the B plan, which is to route the sewer line through A8B, through the elderly housing, to still provide access to A9A is the name, the apartments going on the north side of DP Road, which is Canyon Walk Apartments. So they've rerouted the sewer line to take it a bit away from the uranium. I'm a little bit surprised that they're allowing residential development to go forward, but from what I've been able to gather, the reasoning is that it's another parcel, A16A. So A16A was a disposal site for the Manhattan Project, and it's actually that parcel where the uranium was found. And I believe DOE has decided that they are going to re-inspect A16A, but because the parcel where the elderly housing complex is going in was not a Manhattan Project disposal site, they have decided that it's safe for them to go ahead. That since what this was basically trash that somebody threw away. I mean, it's a total window into the 40s Manhattan Project era that a lead crucible with radioactive material in it was trash. But because it was trash that was found, the assumption, I believe, is that they are not going to find more of it at the elderly housing parcel. So yeah, they're going ahead with it. I've also heard that when the geotech work is being done, that DOE is going to have environmental people, radiation people out there, making sure that everything is okay, right? I guess probably really they're going to have DOE people out there for the geotech work in case the geotech people dig something up. And of course, if that happens, then DP Road's going to be in real bad shape. Yeah, Native Americans are a very vulnerable population. Yeah, no doubt about that. And I certainly appreciate the desire to prioritize, or the decision to prioritize testing kits for the Native population. Though, as I said, it definitely remains absurd that there's such low availability of testing kits that we're even talking about prioritizing testing when it is the most important thing to be doing from a public policy perspective.
Yeah, especially since nearly all the epidemiologists and health officials are saying if we want to restart, we have to test more.
Yeah, so the comment there was, that the opinion of the epidemiologists is that if we want to start reopening things, then wide-scale testing is the prerequisite for that to be a good idea. So, yeah, and I guess one never really knows with the way the White House is, but hopefully there's a increasing federal focus on getting test kits made. Unfortunately, as far as Los Alamos goes, the county side, this side of the bridge, we have basically no manufacturing infrastructure. As is usually the story with Los Alamos, we just don't have space to support something like that. And whether or not the lab has the ability to fabricate test kits, I don't know, but certainly if they do, whatever available resources we have, the manufacture of test kits definitely needs to be one of the top priorities now. And yeah, it is unfortunate that that's a federal question and that there's very little that we can do about that at the county level.
So one of the topics that was brought up on your radio interview was the parking situation, and you mentioned there the desired at least one municipal parking structure. So can you say more about that?
Yeah, so this was one of the questions that came up with KRSN is parking, right? So the problem that we always have with this county is how landlocked we are. And one of the big ways that manifests is parking. So, among other things, it means that that Automotive Professionals is drastically under-provisioned on parking. But, a complaint people make about this county that is absolutely justified is how much of downtown is asphalt. And perhaps so I guess to back up a bit, the number of parking spaces that a business needs to have is mandated by county code. And it is the chapter of county code that at least was planned to be revised this year. And I think that the code revision is still basically on track. But, so a lot of downtown is asphalt. And a lot of that asphalt could be developed into commercial space or to mixed use space. But right now, it probably wouldn't be a very good idea to start doing that, simply because it's still the case that businesses need to have parking spaces. That is, at the very least, there need to be enough parking spaces available overall, right? That downtown itself needs to have adequate parking for the businesses that are downtown. So if we started converting parking lots into buildings, then we would hit a different parking crunch. And in fact, Nancy on KRSN brought up the point that there's also public projects that have been expanding without expanding their parking. And those public projects, the two that I've been on planning and zoning for are the expansion of the ice rink and the expansion of the aquatic center in Los Alamos. They're really good projects. I mean, they're cool amenities to add to the county, and they definitely shouldn't die on the altar of parking, and they haven't. Right, planning and zoning has let them happen even with inadequate parking. But and though you can look this up in public record, I did vote for allowing both of those projects to go forward with parking waivers. So, the parking question then is, well, we need enough parking available overall, particularly if we want to start cutting down on the downtown asphalt. And really the only way to do that is with parking garages, possibly mixed use parking garages, garages with retail on the first floor and parking on second and third. I think we are going to have to start investing in parking garages in the not too distant future, particularly if growth does pick up again. Though at the same time, that's obviously always the caveat with talking about any policy proposals right now, is we have no idea what the long-term effects of the coronavirus are going to be. So, it could also be the case that that growth is going to start leveling out in the county, depending on what the federal budget does in the next few years. So while I did talk on KRSN about what I see to be the need for parking garages in this county, municipal parking garages, at the moment, that was sort of an opinion that is based on an assumption that we get back on a growth trajectory. At the same time, right now, if I was on council today, I would take a wait and see approach on it to see what the long-term effects of the pandemic are. And I suspect that that's probably an attitude that is shared throughout the county. The attitude of right now, just doing what we can to manage the crisis and maintaining current spending, and then looking at our priorities after the crisis has passed.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a follow-up question. Assuming that there is a downturn, I mean, there's already going to be an economic downturn. Say the federal government also pulls back and there's reduced tax revenue for the county. Any sort of priorities there in terms of, I believe this question was already asked on the radio in terms of priorities.
Yeah, so the question is what we do if federal spending starts, at least, I wouldn't say drying up, because, of course, as everybody always points out, pit production is a big deal. So, the lab is not going anywhere, but the lab's current spending levels, there could be cutbacks at the federal level. And so, my view at the moment on the county government and spending is we actually have pretty good reserves in this county. And I do believe in the government being counter-cyclical, right? So I know that's sort of economics aside, but one of the government's economic jobs is to step up and maintain and possibly increase spending in times of downturn. So, of course, we haven't seen too much, I think, overall downturn in the county, simply because the county's already budgeted out, or the lab's already budgeted out. And, it's not clear how long this crisis is going to go on. But, particularly for people who don't, work at the lab, or live with someone who works at the lab, all levels of government should be engaging in spending to counteract the crisis. And the federal government has been, to some extent. And, those programs need to continue. But likewise, when it comes to the county needs to maintain spending throughout the crisis. And we need to be prepared to dip into our reserves to do that, because, counter-cyclical economic policy is really for all levels of government. That said, I will go ahead and relay my deep fear about all of this, which is, is a total economic aside, and more of a national one than a local one. But the last several recessions that the world has endured have really been what we might call paper recessions, right? They've been crises that have originated from some kind of problem with paper. In 2008, we had a crisis from bad loans. In 2001, we had a crisis from overvalued stocks. In 88, I think, there was a ridiculous crisis caused by poorly implemented algorithmic trading programs, right? So we're dealing with, or we're on the precipice of dealing with something that we haven't seen since the 70s, which is a recession coming from the availability of real goods. Right? So back in the 70s, the issue was that the OPEC countries got together and decided that they wanted to raise the price of oil. So they cut off supply of oil, and that caused, global recession. But more importantly, it caused something that we haven't heard in a while, which is stagflation, the combination of stagnation and high inflation. So right now, we're also on the precipice of a goods crisis, right? A crisis being driven not by problems in global credit markets, but problems in global supply chains. So when you're in a paper crisis, you can always solve it with more paper, right? Which is exactly what the federal government did in 2008. The only way to solve a goods crisis is with more goods, and that's not a matter of monetary policy, certainly. And the extent to which it's a matter of fiscal policy is doing whatever is required to bring production back online. So we are going to face the unfortunate question: will the federal government be capable, well, not just the federal government, but all major world governments, will they be capable of restarting supply chains that have stalled out due to the pandemic? And I guess I'll say that's a very dangerous question, or a very unfortunate question. So, while we're in a pandemic now, and it's really bad, and yeah, the response has been inadequate, the dangers certainly don't stop once the virus is under control.
So we're wrap up here with, I guess, a light-hearted question to end on.
Yes. So, what's everyone reading, watching, and playing this week? So, one of my side projects is I've been trying to learn French. So what I'm reading, and actually I brought it with me to the shop, I'm currently making my way through Albert Camus' L'Étranger, which, I don't know, surprisingly for a book written by a major figure in French existentialism, in terms of just the sort of vocabulary and sentence structuring, for my modest comprehension of French, I've been doing a fine job getting through it. I also read Le Petit Prince, with the Little Prince, which is a really cute book and well worth reading. Watching Jordan and I have been watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is definitely one of my all-time favorite shows. Um, so we just watched the episode where Data creates another android, lol, um, which is sort of a strange episode to have had after Measure of a Man, the episode about whether or not Data has rights under Federation law, considering that the bad guy for the episode, which is as usual a crazy callous admiral, uh, doesn't really seem to care about the consequences of the decision for Measure of a Man.
Also related to that, I don't know. Do you know enough about Picard and how that relates to like all the stuff that happened in Picard? Did they just ignore all of that, like
Oh
Law and Measure of a Man?
no, so the question was how this relates to Star Trek Picard. So, as far as I'm concerned, the last episode of Star Trek was about fascists on the moon, which was the second last episode of Enterprise. I have not watched any Star Trek Discovery or Star Trek Picard. Um, I have a vague understanding of what they're about. So, I believe part of the premise of Picard, and I guess this is maybe spoilers, even though these are episodes that have already aired. The premise seems to involve the guy from Measure of a Man, to the Starfleet research guy who's really into cybernetics. That he continued to do research and built more androids. Um, I don't I don't know how or to what extent Lol, the other android that he built, comes into it. Though of course and here I just won't be worried about spoilers because we're talking about an episode that aired, probably 30 years ago. um, the Offspring ends with Lol sort of uh, Cascade failing because Data is just not good enough. Um, I don't really know the extent to which that plays into Picard, and for that matter, I've never understood why Data never tried building another android, and just iterating until he made it work. That's probably the big plot hole of that. Um, but yeah, I know relatively little about Star Trek Picard, so playing. I wouldn't exactly call it good, but I've been playing Slay the Spire, which is a roguelite card game. I don't know. It's okay. That and one of my efforts to learn French is that I play an ancient MMORPG, The Lord of the Rings Online, in a French guild or a Francophone guild. Um, though I'll say, as far as that goes, my comprehension of French is low enough that the only time I tried to raid, I died within 15 seconds because I couldn't quite understand the strategies. So, so I haven't picked that back up again. So yeah, there's sort of a lighter end to this. So thanks for joining us, and I will see you next week.